Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias. Hi everybody, Tobias here, and I bet you know what this knife is even if you didn't read the title of the video. And that is because this is probably one of the most recognized knives in the world. It is the Fairbairn-Sykes fighting knife, also known as the Commando Dagger. This particular one is the pattern 3, or the third pattern made of the Commando Dagger or fighting knife. It's often just referred to as the FS fighting knife. Some claim that the FS now stands for field service. I've heard that said also, but most people just refer to it as the Fairbairn-Sykes or the FS fighting knife. It is a stiletto type knife. It is double-edged. The blade has that diamond cross section, so you got a flat grind on both sides of the middle, and it has that diamond cross section, which makes it a very stiff blade coming to a like needle-like point, very much a stiletto. It was first used by the British Commandos in 1940, or adopted by the British Commandos in 1940. It was brought to them from, I believe, India or someplace like that. There's other people who know a whole lot more about the history of this knife. I will link over to some videos, or throw some links in the description below so you can find out more about the history of this knife. What I can tell you now, though, is that the knife was adopted by the British Commandos in 1940 as their fighting knife, and that was with a pattern 1, and those were made by Wilkinson Sword Company. In any case, Wilkinson was contracted for the very first ones. They turned out a very high quality knife, so much so that they were very expensive to make. Wartime efforts said, we need something a little cheaper, so they came out with the pattern number 2. The pattern number 2 knives were made by Wilkinson and a couple other companies, I believe, maybe just one other company. And then this knife, the pattern 3, came out around October of 1943, and that was like, we really need a lot of these knives and we need them fast. And the company that is attributed with possibly coming out with the pattern 3 version of the FS fighting knife was William Rodgers company, not Joseph Rodgers, William Rodgers, and that is another company in Sheffield, England. And what they were responsible for is basically this handle that you have here. The blade is pretty much the same as the original ones were, except some of the original knives, I believe, had like a 6.5-inch blade. This has a full 7-inch blade. I heard also that the pattern 2 might have had like a 6 3/4-inch or a 7-inch blade, so the length of the blades kind of differed. So the original pattern 1 and 2 knives had a hand-forged blade and a machine knurled handle, which was expensive to make and also time-consuming, and not everyone was able to do it. So they switched to this cast zinc alloy handle, which was much easier to produce, faster to produce. The ribbing was already in there. Almost any company could do it, and it just made production much faster, because what you have is a rat tail tang that goes all the way through the handle and then is screwed in place. And we can just take it apart, because it can easily come apart. And you see here, notice how the handle is just turning here. And here's what you have. You have the cross guard, the blade, which is just a rat tail tang, and then you've got the screw bottom here. See that? So there you have it. And then the handle, which is, as you can see, is hollow all the way through. It's not even necessarily thin, because, and then a simple brass nut on the back, which everything screws into. So that's all the parts. It's basically 4 parts. You could have had one company making the blades, someone else making the guard, someone else crafting the handles, and then the nut being applied somewhere else too. So the knives were being made all over the place. Matter of fact, during World War II, there's at least 6 different designs of handles that were used on this knife. On this knife blade. So, and that's also why sometimes the blade wasn't necessarily always 7 inches. Somebody might have been making it a little smaller, and so on and so forth. Let me put this back together now. And the only way I know which side to put out front is by looking at that, and also by this particular knife is marked, if you can see there, William Rodgers, Sheffield, England. I believe this stamp was done after World War II. I believe this knife was made sometime after the Eckington Group acquired the trademark for the company. The company went out of business sometime in the 1960s, but they were contracted to make these knives after World War II, from 46 to whenever they went out of business. So, and if you notice, this thing kind of spins a little bit, and then you just slip the handle on, and then you got a nut that you can screw in. And let's see here. Don't like it that way? I'll turn it around and put it on. Yeah. So, and once you get it in, you kind of have to get everything lined back up, get it in the right spot, and then choke up on it a bit and make sure the blade is straight. So, and as you can see, there's not much to this knife. If you want to make sure that the whole thing doesn't fall apart on you and everything is lined up right, you kind of have to just play with it a little bit, and then probably use a little Loctite once you get everything in place, because that is the way these knives are. And it kind of leads me to my first complaint about the knives, is the build quality on these things is not the greatest in the world, especially considering the amount of money that people are willing to pay for these. Now, we have to understand that the Ministry of Defense said, we need a quick, fast knife, and we don't want to spend a lot of money on it, and this is what you get when you're doing that for the Ministry of Defense. You get a brutal, effective knife that gets the job done, but it is a low-priced knife at the same time. I'm not even sure what kind of steel is being used in this knife these days. I assume that back then they were probably using something in the area of like a 1070 or 1095 steel in the blade. Who knows what they're using today? They are still making these knives for the military. But from what I've read, the ones that are made for the military are not marked at all. So the fact that this one has this mark on the guard here leads me to believe that this was actually made for the civilian market. However, it is made to the military specs of the day. So you got this little brass nut on the bottom here, a zinc alloy handle, a metal cross guard that is painted black, and then a blade that looks like it might have been blued. I don't know. Might be parkerized. I don't really know. It comes with a sheath that I've never found necessarily appealing. Sorry, all my friends in Great Britain. I am 100% behind this knife as a brutal fighting knife and in the right hands a deadly fighting knife. But when you're looking at this knife and the price that people will pay for it on the civilian market, it's incredible. Now I can understand that this is definitely something that was made during World War II, but this obviously was not. And even these, if you were to try and buy this new, they tend to run in the $100 to $150 range. And when you consider, you've got a leather sheath and the knife does not fit very well in the sheath, and then you've got just a metal stamp on the bottom here. See how that is? It's just one rivet holding it in at the very bottom, and then this has been like this forever. This little elastic band that goes across the top and snaps in place to hold the knife in place. This is, I've never quite understood that. There are a lot of better made knives out there, but the other knives do not have the same history that these do. Okay, as I mentioned before, in 1943, William Rodgers is credited with coming out with the Pattern 3 knife. They supposedly came out with the design of the handle, with the ribs and all that other stuff. And I suspect that's why now the Eggington Group is using the William Rodgers tang stamp on the FS knife. And I showed it already, it's right up here. Now supposedly the ones that are issued do not have any kind of tang stamp on it, but that would mean that the only difference between an issued knife and this one, which was probably made for the civilian market, is the light tang stamp here. So if you wanted to file that off, you could basically pretend that this was something that was an issued knife. However, I don't know for certain. I do not know if the issued knives actually have that tang stamp on there. They may. I really don't know, because, well, I'm not in the British military. So maybe someone who has served in the British military or has had one of these knives issued to them, and I don't know what other countries might be using it. I don't know if Canada and Australia use these anymore or not. But maybe someone who has actually served can tell us if they actually do have a tang stamp on them or not. But the reason I think Eggington Group is using that tang stamp for the Pattern 3s that they're making now is because William Rodgers is the company that is credited with coming out with this style of handle with the Pattern 3 knife. The other problem with these knives, though, is really, you saw how easy it is to take it apart. So in theory, if someone had a World War II era fighting knife and say the handle was messed up or something, or the blade was bent or broken, it would be very easy for them to take it apart and take one of the modern blades and put it on there, do a little distressing work on the blade, and pretend they have one from World War II. So unless you really know what you're looking for with one of these knives, I would assume that you're dealing with something from the modern era, because it's very easy to swap parts out on this. You got a bad handle, put on a different handle, so on and so forth. Now at the same time, that would mean that if a person had, say, they actually did have 2 or 3 of these things from World War II and they wanted to make one good knife out of parts, they might be able to put something together out of them, and at that point I would still consider that a World War II knife, simply because all the parts are period correct. But if I were to go to sell it, I would also say, yes, all of the parts are from World War II, however, the knife was built from broken parts. For instance, if you had a broken blade or something, and or bent whatever, I don't know. But in any case, It is a pretty cool knife. I am glad that I finally did pick one up. The only reason I picked it up though is because I got it at a steal of a price. If I would have never paid the full asking price of one of these, because my first experience with one of these knives was back in 1980, when a friend of mine was showing it, because I had my Camillus fighting knife, and he went and bought one of these. Later on, when he was fiddling with it, I saw how easy it comes apart. It's so easy for it to come apart, and to me, it just seemed very cheap. 4 parts, and the whole knife is apart, which is actually makes sense for a knife in wartime, to be able to fix and repair and put these together so easily in factories all across England. It made a bunch of sense, but at that time, these things were relatively inexpensive. Even in 1980, I mean, you could pick one of these up for $10 or $15, going at the same price as like and I'm talking about ones made in Sheffield. You could get the ones made in Japan for dirt cheap, but the original Sheffield knives, even back then, were running at around the same price that you would pay for, the Camillus fighting knife. And to me, this is a knife that you should be paying about half what you're paying for these things. They go for like between $100 and $150, and I think they're probably worth about $50. I mean, really, what you're buying is the history of the knife. You're not really buying a quality made knife with these things. In any case, with that said, let's move on and do a slideshow. And I'll compare this with a bunch of other knives. let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with the Bias. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.